Carol Ann Dougherty was born on December 24, 1952, to parents Frank and Dorothy Dougherty. At the age of 9, Carol lived with her family in Manor Circle in Bristol, Pennsylvania. On October 22, 1962, Carol Ann had plans to meet her friends at the library to return 2 books and get the next one in the series. She often rode her bike through town, and anytime she'd pass by in front of St. Mark's Roman Catholic Church, where she was a 5th grade student, she always stopped in front or went inside to say a prayer. However, this day was different, and Carol would never leave the church alive. When she didn't return home by 4:30, her parents became concerned and began searching for her. Witnesses said they saw her ride past a local market and even stopped at Tommy's Cafe to grab a Coke and penny candy before continuing on her way. Since she never made it to the library, her father, Frank, went to the church to look for her. He arrived at around 6 p.m. and sadly found her body on the landing leading to the choir loft. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death, and police determined that she was likely attacked at approximately 3:35 p.m. Investigators found pubic hairs clutched in Carol's hand, and they would eventually point investigators to the killer. A witness was later found and reported seeing William Schrader, who lived a block and a half from the church on Lincoln Avenue, cutting through his backyard acting suspiciously. Schrader, who was originally from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, had moved to the area around the time of the crime and was known for his distinctive scar on his face. It's unclear who knew it at the time, but he had an alarming history of sexual violence towards little girls. Plus, a Lucky Strike cigarette had been found at the church, and it was determined to be the same brand Schrader was known to smoke. When he was questioned, he said he was at work at the time of the murder, and that the witness must have been mistaken. However, this proved to be a lie, as his time card showed he hadn't shown up to work in 3 days, starting on the day of the murder. Despite this evidence, her case remained unsolved for the next 63 years. After becoming aware that he was a suspect, he left Pennsylvania in January 1963, 3 months after the murder. He fled to Florida and bounced around Texas and Louisiana, eventually settling in Houma, Louisiana, where he lived most of his life and where he continued his horrific crimes against young girls. Thankfully, before he moved, investigators were able to collect a pubic hair sample from him to be used in future testing. After settling in Louisiana, Schrader met a woman through her adult son, a fellow inmate at a correctional facility in Louisiana. He eventually married the woman, who also had an adult daughter and an underage daughter, both of whom had special needs. It wasn't long before he was abusing both of them sexually and even conceived a child with one of them. After his own child turned 8 years old, he began abusing her as well. He and his wife also adopted a 2-year-old girl and allowed Catherine Smith, a 9-year-old neighbor, to live in their home. Before long, he was also sneaking into her bedroom. On the evening of October 31, 1970, Schrader physically assaulted his wife following an argument, prompting his other adult stepson to kick him out of the home. As Schrader gathered his things, he told his family, "I'm coming back and I'm going to burn the house down and kill all the bitches inside it." He then went to the gas station, purchased gas in a small can, and went back and set the house on fire. Inside at the time were his wife, Audrey, her daughter from a previous marriage, Elizabeth, and her daughter's friend, 9-year-old Catherine Smith. Sadly, Catherine had been locked in her room, so Schrader couldn't get to her, and as a result, she perished in the fire. But not before saving her 2-year-old foster sister by placing her body on top of her. The 2-year-old survived, but was then sexually abused by Schrader as she got older. As for Elizabeth, she suffered permanent brain damage, and Audrey, her mother, was hospitalized and survived without significant injury. State and city fire officials investigated the blaze, and while they felt it was arson, they couldn't be sure because no point of origin could be found. The tragedy remained unsettled until June 1985, when investigators received information that the fire had been deliberately set. Experts re-examined the burned-out remains, and after at least one concluded the fire was intentionally set, he was indicted for the murder of Catherine. He pleaded not guilty and went to trial. a jury found him guilty of manslaughter and arson, and he was sentenced to 21 years in prison. Investigators determined he had sexually abused nearly every female child or woman he'd lived with or had access to, plus more. Schrader had a lengthy criminal history, including attempted murder, assault, domestic violence, and sexual assaults of women and young girls. He had been violent for most of his life and was known for assaulting young girls by clubbing them in the face as early as the age of 8. Schrader spent much of his youth in and out of reform school in Luzerne County before enlisting in the Army at 17. He was dishonorably discharged a year later and then moved back to Wilkes-Barre. Not long after, Schrader, then 20, was charged with firing a shotgun at a 17-year-old boy in the area of the old Pennsylvania Railroad roundhouse, just south of Hazel Avenue and Cinderella Street, on May 11, 1958. He was arrested for the crime and eventually convicted of intent to kill with a deadly weapon. While jailed at the Luzerne County Prison, the warden requested that Schrader be removed as soon as possible to the Eastern Penitentiary in Philadelphia, as he was assaulting correctional officers and other inmates. In 1961, he was released from the Eastern Penitentiary and became a transient, mostly staying with his family in Lancaster and Bucks counties. In the 1990s, his pubic hair was tested and found to have significant similarities to the ones clutched in Carol's hand. In 1993, Pennsylvania State Police did their own analysis of the samples and determined that Schrader was the only suspect who couldn't be eliminated. He was then extradited to Bucks County, where he again denied responsibility for her death, and was then sent back to prison in Louisiana. Charges couldn't be filed against him then because the hair fiber analysis was insufficient evidence to move forward, and DNA testing proved inconclusive. In 1994, a grand jury was convened to investigate the murder. 2 suspects, Joseph Sabadish and William Schrader, were brought before the grand jury, with Schrader having to be extradited from Louisiana once again. Sabadish and Frank Dougherty testified, while Schrader invoked his Fifth Amendment right to not answer questions that could incriminate him. Since both suspects passed polygraphs, the grand jury decided not to indict them. Years would go by once again until 2024, when investigators interviewed Schrader's stepson, who said Schrader confessed to him on 2 separate occasions that he murdered a little girl in a Pennsylvania church and killed her so she couldn't talk. It was once again brought before a grand jury, and this time they felt they had enough evidence to show that Schrader had murdered poor little Carol Ann. Unfortunately, he died in 2002 at the age of 63 while serving time behind bars for the murder of Catherine Smith, so all they could do was confirm him as the murderer and close the case. The grand jury's findings are detailed in a 53-page report that President Judge Raymond F. McHugh, the grand jury's supervisor, approved on October 27, 2025. Kay Dougherty, Carol Ann's sister, and the lone surviving member of her immediate family, praised those that had dedication to solving the case. Cynthia Ann McKenna was born in December 1957. At the age of 49, she lived in apartment A9 at 242 Waterman Avenue in North Providence, Rhode Island, and was the mother of a daughter named Jacqueline McKenna. Unfortunately, in 2007, Jacqueline lost her mother in a horrible, senseless tragedy. In late February of that year, all communication with Cynthia stopped, and the building manager where she lived took notice. After several days of not seeing her, he called and notified one of her family members. They rushed over, went inside her apartment, and were horrified at what they found. Tightly tucked under the bed linens with 2 pillows over her face was the body of Cynthia. She died from asphyxiation after gagging on a sock in her mouth. She was also found with tissues in her nostrils. The building manager told investigators that Cynthia had been dating a man named Robert J. Corey Jr., who went by Gunner. However, the building manager had recently changed her locks because she and Corey had been fighting. Corey was questioned and had large gaps in his alibi, but they still couldn't prove that he murdered her beyond a reasonable doubt. Witnesses recalled seeing her last get out of a silver pickup truck outside her apartment complex 3 days earlier, and not again afterward. Throughout the investigation, 3 informants and 5 witnesses provided statements detailing the hostile relationship between Cynthia and Corey, stemming from domestic violence charges Cynthia filed against him, as well as claims of money that Corey owed her. In 2007, investigators found letters that Corey had written to an inmate at the Adult Correctional Institution in Cranston. In the letters, he confessed to the murder, and a handwriting analysis determined it was likely his writing. They also attempted to check it for DNA, but he wasn't in the CODIS database, so they had to reach out to a relative. Using a bottle found in the trash and genetic genealogy research, investigators were able to confirm that Robert Corey had indeed killed Cynthia McKenna on or about February 19, 2007. Unfortunately, justice could never be served because Corey passed away in 2014 at the age of 52. Deborah Stone was born on February 15, 1960. At the age of 24, she shared an apartment with a roommate on Hoffman Avenue in Cranston, Rhode Island, and was described by friends and family as a very outgoing and friendly woman. Then, on August 29, 1984, she would strangely go missing. Roughly 4 days later, on September 2, 1984, someone discovered her nude body in the Narrow River in Narragansett, Rhode Island. She'd been wrapped in a floral sleeping bag, tied with rope, and weighed down with a cement cinder block. Investigators didn't immediately know her identity and matched her fingerprints to an old arrest. An autopsy determined that her cause of death was asphyxiation due to strangulation. During the investigation, multiple witnesses noted that Deborah had visited a man named Robert Jeremiah in Johnston the night of August 29, 1984, and that was the last time she was ever seen alive. One informant told police he saw Deborah in Jeremiah's apartment on the night of August 29th, and later helped move her body from the apartment to the Narrow River on August 30th. His statement matched evidence from the scene and what other witnesses said. Another witness told police she saw Jeremiah shortly after Deborah's death, and that he told her he had to kill Deborah because she was stealing from him. At the time, police struggled to believe the informants because of their drug use and criminal records. When Jeremiah was questioned, he claimed that Deborah took a cab to the Simmons Village apartments where he lived with his sister in apartment 314. His mother also lived in the same complex, but in apartment 207. He claimed that when Deborah arrived at his sister's apartment, she tried to trade a black watch for drugs, but he told her he didn't have any and then claimed he drove her back to her apartment in Cranston, arriving around 11 p.m. He also said he later learned that the watch she had tried to trade had been allegedly stolen from a male acquaintance. Investigators would later learn that Jeremiah was telling others that Deborah had overdosed. However, a medical examiner ruled out an overdose because of the injuries to her neck, which pointed to strangulation. Also, a longtime friend of Deborah's and another man stopped by Jeremiah's apartment around midnight on August 29th. He said the friend, who would later become an informant, went inside while Deborah's friend waited in the car. When the informant came back, he said he saw Deborah inside and that she was staying the night with Jeremiah. The informant said he was terrified of Jeremiah because of his potential ties to the mafia, which investigators later confirmed. Jeremiah was also known for his very violent behavior, which the informant had witnessed firsthand. He said he knew Jeremiah very well because they had both been involved in drug distribution, which required them to travel to New York. The informant said that when he returned later that morning on August 30th, he saw Deborah lying in Jeremiah's bed. When he later found out about the murder, he said he knew immediately that Jeremiah was responsible. He also claimed to know the friend that Jeremiah had brought in to help dispose of her body. On top of that, he also knew the reason for the murder. He said he heard that when Deborah woke up, Jeremiah found her stealing from him and strangled her to death. However, when he was asked about it, he stuck to the overdose story. Investigators wanted the name of the friend who allegedly helped Jeremiah clean up and dispose of Deborah's body, but the informant refused, saying the friend had since passed away. On September 22, 1986, during a fourth conversation with the informant, he finally came clean and said the friend who helped Jeremiah was none other than himself. He then provided some additional details. He said when he arrived at the apartment around midnight on August 29th, he saw Deborah gagging and nodding off. He said he asked Jeremiah to help her, but he responded that she'd be fine, so he took his drugs and left. When he returned later that morning, Jeremiah wouldn't let him inside and instructed him instead to go to his mother's apartment to get the drugs, which he did. He then returned home, but an hour later, Jeremiah showed up at his house and asked him for help with a, and I quote, problem. He said when he went inside the apartment, he found Deborah's lifeless body in the bathtub. That's when Jeremiah lied and said she died from an overdose. Unfortunately, even though investigators had probable cause to charge Robert Jeremiah with Deborah's death, no arrests were ever made, and the case eventually went cold. In 2019, the case was reopened, and in 2023, the Attorney General's Cold Case Unit joined the investigation. 32 witnesses were re-interviewed, and even after all these years, their statements remained consistent. At that point, they decided they had enough evidence to show that Jeremiah was indeed responsible for Deborah's murder. Unfortunately, he would never be held accountable because he died of natural causes on May 23, 1995, at the age of 43. Since the actual cause of death was never given, we can only speculate that he might have died from a heart attack, stroke, aneurysm, or something along those lines. As for the informant, he can no longer be charged because of the statute of limitations has run out. On October 29, 2025, authorities announced the case was officially closed. Sherry Marie Clark was born at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida on January 17, 1967. In 1974, the family moved to Dothan, Alabama, and in 1985, Sherry graduated from Northview High School. She remained in Dothan and worked the majority of her life at the Avis Rent-A-Car franchise that her parents owned at the Dothan Regional Airport. Friends and family described her as a warm and friendly woman who had many passions in life. She never met a stranger and loved her customers as if they were her own family. But sadly, in 2024, it would all come to an end. On November 10, 2024, Sherry failed to show up for her shift at Avis. Her family was immediately concerned, and later that day, when she still hadn't shown up, her father called 911 and asked for a welfare check. Both the Dale County Sheriff's Office and the Midland City Police took the call. When they entered the house, they found Sherry naked, bound, and deceased inside her bedroom. A preliminary autopsy determined that she died from blunt force trauma to the head and had cuts on all of her private parts. She also sustained significant brain damage. An autopsy revealed she died sometime between 11 p.m. Saturday and 3 a.m. Sunday. It wouldn't take investigators long to learn that a 29-year-old man by the name of James Johnston Jr. had been released from the Florida Department of Corrections a week earlier and was now living with his mother next door to Sherry. When they dug into his criminal history, they discovered a lengthy record with burglary, theft, drug arrest, and convictions. Johnston was brought in for an interview and claimed he and Sherry knew each other and had met several times between 2019 and 2020. He said they even had sex on some occasions. Most believe this was a lie to explain the possible DNA he might have left at the scene. Regardless, investigators arrested Johnston and charged him with capital murder after using digital evidence to prove he was at Sherry's home that night. In the end, he accepted a plea deal and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Tanya Marie Frazier was born on October 29, 1979, in Seattle, Washington. She grew up in the city and, by age 14, had graduated from Washington Middle School. That summer, she started taking classes at Meany Middle School and worked part-time at a local soup kitchen. Friends and family described Tanya as a loving, shy, and wonderful friend. Sadly, that same summer, Tanya would come face to face with evil. On July 18, 1994, Tanya planned to attend her summer class and then go to work at the Chicken Soup Brigade, where she helped provide meals to people in need. Sadly, after being seen at the bus stop at East 23rd Street and East John, she would strangely disappear. When she failed to return home later, her mother, Teresa Frazier, reported her missing. Police initially listed her as a runaway, but that would quickly change. 5 days after her disappearance, a man walking his dog found Tanya's body in the bushes along the 2200 block of East Highland Drive in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, not far from where she was last seen. She'd been sexually assaulted and suffered sharp force injuries to her head and neck. Investigators believed she was killed elsewhere, and her body was moved to that location. DNA was collected at the scene, but at the time it couldn't be matched to anyone, and the case remained unsolved for the next 31 years. In 2025, the DNA from the crime scene was retested and checked against their inmate DNA database, and it matched 57-year-old Mark Anthony Russ, who would have been 26 years old at the time of the murder. Russ had recently been released from prison, and that's when his DNA was entered into a prison database, which is what eventually led to the match. He has a lengthy criminal record, and after Tanya's murder, in the mid to late 90s, he was given life in prison without the possibility of parole for violating Washington's three-strike law. Those crimes consisted of an assault in the second degree with a deadly weapon enhancement in 1987. In 1991, he was convicted of robbery in the second degree, and then in 1996, he was convicted of first-degree sexual assault, burglary in the first degree, and robbery in the first degree. 2 years later, he tried to sexually assault another woman during a home robbery in Tukwila, Washington. However, in 2019, Washington lawmakers voted to remove second-degree robbery from the list of offenses that automatically trigger a life sentence. 2 years later, in 2021, that change was made retroactive, requiring prosecutors across the state to return eligible cases to court for resentencing. The change made 114 inmates eligible for new sentences, and Russ was one of them. That same year, he was released from jail and placed on court-ordered supervision, which ended in 2023. After his arrest for Tanya's murder, Russ was ordered held without bail, since he is a Level 3 sex offender who was non-compliant at the time of his arrest. According to the Washington Sex Offender Registry, he uses the aliases Mark Dido, Michael Dido, Gerald Lee Russ, and Tony Smith. His first court appearance was scheduled for Wednesday, November 5, 2025, and it's reported that he waived his right to appear in person for that hearing, and thankfully remains behind bars, awaiting the outcome of the case.